I'm Fran Morley, and I'm here today with Helen Trione Callaway for the Veterans History Project. Helen was born September 6, 1923 in Daphne, Alabama. She was in the U.S. Marine Corps Women's Reserve, serving from October 1943 to November 1945, and left the service with the rank of corporal. We're filming today, March 1st, 2011, at the Fairhope Public Library for the Friends of the Fairhope Library and the Veterans History Project in the American Folklife Center at the Library of Congress. Thanks for coming in, Helen.
You're welcome.
Appreciate it. You told me that you graduated in 1942. The U.S. was already at war at that time, and it must have been an exciting time to be a young girl living in Alabama. You got a job at the shipyards before you enlisted.
I went to the shipyard, and then I stayed there till I saw a guy fall from the floor above me, and he was coming down by the window where I was typing, and I thought, this is not for me. By the time he hit the ground, he was dead. So the next day, I went out to Berkeley Field and applied for a job, and in 2 days they hired me, and I was working in a tool room. And I worked there long enough to open up the tool rooms at the different departments, 4 or 5 different departments. And then I decided, after working at Berkeley Field from 42 to 43, that I wasn't going to get nowhere. I would just give it up. So I went home. The man that was boss, and I said, well, I'm giving this job up. He said, you can't give it up. It's a war on. I said, well, you just watch me. He said, well, you're not going nowhere. So the next day I came in, and I told him I wanted a 2 weeks notice that I was leaving, going in the Marine Corps. And that man almost fell over. So I left Fairhope, Daphne, and went into the Marine Corps to New River, North Carolina. And then that was Camp Lejeune. I stayed there 8 weeks. The last 2 weeks, I'd done my KP duty, and they told me if I'd do that, I wouldn't have to do it for no more for a year. So I went to California, to El Toro, and at El Toro, the Marine base there looked at my papers and all, and and they gave me a job doing the same work with the same tools in the tool room at El Toro. So I was back almost being at home at Berkeley Field. So that was interesting.
What made you decide to join the Marines?
I don't know. I was going with a boy. I was engaged to a boy to be married and go to Hawaii on a honeymoon. He was an only child from parents and dad. And he was in the Navy. And he was on a merchant ship that had been torpedoed, and he was taken a prisoner of war by the Japanese. And he survived that from, the middle of 42 until 43. And the Japanese government was moving 5,000 American prisoners of war from A to B. And the ship was not marked Red Cross. And we sunk the ship and killed just a handful of men survived. One young man from Pritchard did survive, and he came and told the family a lot of.
Did this happen before you enlisted?
Yeah, about the time I enlisted. So that really kind of put the fire on me. I thought, well, I'm gone. And I stayed in California till the end of 44. And Roosevelt signed a bill that he would allow women to go on foreign soil. Hawaii was foreign soil. Well, that really put the fire on me because I was supposed to honeymoon in Hawaii, and I was anxious to see what I missed. Well, we, the Marine Corps sent 82 women, the first detachment, to Honolulu, to Barbers Point. And I got to go because yesterday I got my sergeant's rating. So I called my daddy and, oh, Daddy, I've got my sergeant's rating. He was subsidizing me $15, $20 every time he wrote a letter. You don't have to send me any more money. And I went to them and told them, okay, I'm not on the list to go to Hawaii. And how come? They said, well, your sergeant's rating has just come into effect, and we're only going to send 4 sergeants, and you're number 5, and we don't have a place for you. So I said, have you got a place for a corporal? They said, yeah. I said, well, you take the stripe and give me my corporal's rating back and let me go to Hawaii. They said, okay.
You told me that didn't make much difference in your pay.
No, $4 a month. And Daddy was sending me all the spending money. So I felt real fortunate that I got to go. Well, when I got to Barbers Point, they put me in charge of the laundry, which sounds like a dirty job. But the group of girls that went, they were just lovely. It was a small group of us. We had all gone there with the intention of winning the war, doing our part. And it was a small group. In El Toro, we were 2,000 women. So there I was in at the laundry. And oh heck, I have pictures showing I could pick up a stack of 50 sheets and put them from A to B just like 5 sheets. And we just had a great time. We worked hard. We gave our hearts to it. And the 82 of us became like real family and sisters. And I still hear from a number of the girls. And
were you supervising in the laundry? Was that your job?
No, I was just in charge of this one particular section that every day I had to figure out how many dirty sheets and pillowcases were in that cart. And they would give me that many clean ones. And I would move them from the cart, the buggy they were on, to where I was working. And every Marine that went south of Honolulu, Barbers Point, had to come by my desk and give their name, serial number, and rank, name, and serial number for 2 dirty sheets and 2 pillowcases. And I would give them 2 clean sheets and 2 clean pillowcases. And that went on all day.
And you got to meet some famous people that way.
Oh, yeah. Oh, we got to meet, it was just great. We, Tyrone Powell and Ted Williams and just all kinds. And occasionally a boy from the Eastern Shore. Oh. I met a number of boys from the Eastern Shore. And that was a real experience there. There was nothing to do. Honolulu was nothing. Mm-hmm. If your mother wasn't young enough to appreciate a grass skirt for Mother's Day, there was nothing to send her. I sent my mother a grass skirt and she thought I'd lost my mind. But anyway, the officers were real good to us girls. They saw the PX and the commissary and everything. We ate great. And they all wanted to come eat with us because they had the cream potatoes in one section of the plate, the meat. They didn't throw that piece of cake on top of the cream potatoes that we were used to. So they would let the boys come over and eat with us. And of course, they were anxious to come and eat because, well, they just served it a little more civilized, I guess.
Were a lot of the Marines on base coming back from
Well,
being in combat?
a lot of them were coming back, and a lot were going. We went over there. Roosevelt, the motto was that we were to relieve a man to go fight. And some of those guys said, hell with that. They had already done their fight. Don't come over here and relieve me to go fight. So that was always a joke. But we had done a lot of sunbathing at beach time. There was one major there, that Major Bruton, and he had been in the Army back years before, left the Army by the time the war started. Then he had to re-enlist in the Marine Corps, and he always said, I close my eyes every time I go downtown because I don't know how many of these children belong to me. That was always a big joke to us. But he always, once a week, he would call us and say, okay, we're going to the beach. And he was head of the food, I guess you'd call them. And he saw that we had plenty of steak and baked potato and beer. He was really good to us and made the life, entertaining or whatever on Sundays. So I met this boy in the Seabees, and he was a Mormon, lovely young man. His father had been wounded in World War I and was in an institution, and he hardly remembered his father. But I would go, one of my jobs in the quartermaster was to go once a week with this guy, not him, but another guy, to take money to the bank. And we would have maybe $75,000 in a Jeep that we was taking into Honolulu to bank for the government. So that was interesting. But on the way, we passed the Mormon Temple in Honolulu, a gorgeous building up on the mountainside, and there was white marble steps all the way up. And this little CB was a big Mormon. And I begged that boy until I just wore myself out, please take me to church Sunday. I'm curious. Of course, I was Roman Catholic, and I was not about to give up my religion for that. But anyway, after I dogged him for weeks and weeks, he said, Helen, I cannot take you. They will not let you in. You have no credentials proving that you're a Mormon, and they won't let you in the door. I said, I can't believe that. That don't sound possible. Well, he finally, left, begging him for months, okay, we going Sunday. So I get all dressed up, my white uniform, and I'm dressed to the nines, and we go up there, and sure enough, they don't let me in. So that was the end of that deal. But there was things like that was so memorized.
Did you usually have every weekend off?
No, you had to work a lot of weekends. You'd have to. The laundry, they didn't do much work on Sunday, so we had Sunday off. But in El Toro, the girls in the Catholic Church, there were priests there. Oh, he was so against women in the service that he got up every Sunday morning and preached a sermon on how worthless the women were.
In the service?
In the service. So you heard that every Sunday, so we go to...
Well, what did you think?
We go listen to him because we had to go to church on Sunday. But then we come right out the door and go into the Protestant chapel because he was praising us to the nines and giving us a good talk. So that was the difference. But while I was in Hawaii, my girlfriend was the chaplain's assistant. And he had a friend, a childhood the family that lived next door to him, their daughter had contacted leprosy. And she was sent to Molokai when she was only 7 years old. So when he left and was stationed in Hawaii, he went home and he promised the family that if all possible, he would go to Molokai and visit with this girl. She was then 65 years old, 60 years old. So we talked him into letting us go with him. That was an ordeal. And we got to Molokai. We flew from Honolulu to Molokai. And then we got a donkey and rode the donkeys back. Oh, it seemed like to me, now that I think about it, half a day up that mountainside to get to the colony. And of course we knew when we left that we was not going to be able to go in. She and I would not be able to go. But we said, well, we'd go anyway because the trip was worth the effort. So we went to Molokai, and the priest, the chaplain, they let him in, and he found the girl, the lady, and visited with her, and it was just unreal. So he came back on Sunday, and he made a talk on Molokai, the leper colony, and then made a trip back to Boston to talk to her family. But that was a trip that and his talk afterwards has stayed with me for the rest of my life. It was just unreal. The donkey ride and the whole bit.
Did you fly from the Big Island to Molokai?
Yeah, we flew over, and then we spent the night. They had made arrangements for the girl, Irene and I, to spend the night with his family. And the father had worked up at Molokai, in that colony that we stayed with. So that was interesting.
You told me a story that when you knew you were going to Hawaii, you hoped to get some pineapple, but that wasn't available to you, right?
No, and you would ride down the highway, and there would just be field after field, miles of pineapple fields. And you'd think, well, golly, stop that Jeep, pull over here and stop this Jeep, and let's get us a pineapple, because they were right there. And they told us when we got there, if you were caught in one of the pineapple fields, that they would discharge you for it. They put the fear in you about that.
Pretty serious.
Mm-hmm. They were serious about it. So we ate very little pineapple over there. You'd have thought we'd got a lot of Dole pineapple. And it was Dole pineapple signs, but they didn't let us eat it.
Going back to the people that you said you got to meet, you mentioned Tyrone Powers, and you also got to meet Ted Williams, the baseball player. Tell us about that. Ted
Williams this other girlfriend from Boston, she and I and we still correspond and talk on the telephone. She became president of the business administration at Boston College. And she was a baseball fan. She could read you off scores and information on baseball from day one. And golly, Ted Williams came in, and he was just starting out in baseball, and he would argue with that poor little old Irish girl, and from daylight till dark. And she'd say, well, I'll just prove it to you. And she'd take the notebook she had in her hip pocket. He says, here's the information, I'm right. And he just thought that was the funniest thing. He was so intrigued by the knowledge she had of baseball. And so after we came out of the service, Christmas card 2 went by, and then he sent us 2 tickets to the World Series every year. I never got to go, but my friend did, because she lived up in baseball country. And back those days, in my young married life, you didn't leave husband and children and fly to Boston or anywhere else to a ball game. So I never did go. I think once or twice I called and said, well, you just don't give my 2 tickets away. So-and-so's gonna, you send them to me. Friend would go. But it was, I always prized that. And I was an honor guard one year for, one time, James Roosevelt visited the base. And he was there. He was in the Marine Corps, and he had a big, high rank, naturally. And I stood a color guard for his visit. But it was just that 2 years was just a real important to me. The friends I made. I didn't take advantage of the GI Bill of Rights and go to college when I came home, but that's all right too. I went to work in the post office and worked 35 years, and so
What happened when you were? What happened at the end of the war? You were discharged.
I came home, and my father was in bad health. My mother was getting older, and I decided, well, I'd go work for them for a while. But by that time, I was unsettled. The time had gone by. I knew I wasn't going to get married in the service. I had no desire for that. I came back, married a boy that I had met right after I graduated. But I stayed with my mother and father in the grocery business. 6 weeks. Didn't take me long to figure out. And I went back to work at Brooklyn Field. And I stayed at Brooklyn Field for about a year and was going to be married, decided to get married to this hometown boy. And he was going to follow in the footsteps of his father and go to sea. And so he told me, he said, we were going to be married, and he said, you can live anywhere you want to live, because it doesn't make any difference to me. I can fly at any point when I'm off of the ship. And he said, I can go anywhere where you decide to live. Wherever you decide to live, you've got to stay there till any child we have has graduated from high school. He had been in 13 schools in 11 years. And he didn't want children to have to do that. So I said, okay, I'm going to Fairhope, Alabama. He said, He said, our marriage wouldn't last 6 months if I let you go back to Fairhope. So that was the end of that. So I said, well, I'll just stay in Daphne. That's where my folks are. So his father, we were married a year. And on our first anniversary, we were taking his father to Birmingham, a young man, 55 years old, that had contracted cancer. We didn't know that until he died, but I was working in the store, and I decided I had to go. I left the store and went to take care of him. His mother and father were kind of, you didn't know whether they were going to make a marriage or not. It was a sad situation. And the father wouldn't go to my wedding because his son was married in the Catholic Church. And that was a no-no. But I said, on his deathbed, 3 days before he died, he called me in and told me how sorry, how ugly, that he'd been ugly, and he knew it, and he wanted me to forgive him, which it didn't bother me too much. I wasn't going to marry him out of the church, and he didn't have nothing to offer, so I just let it be. But he was a great man. He was nice. He was real sick, and I told myself, well, the next time I have to take you to the hospital, I'm going to take you to the Catholic hospital in Mobile and let you get a good dose of, of my religion. I did. And he fell in love with those old nuns. They were so good to him. And he died in June of 1948. And in July, the postmaster, Daphne, he had done so much for the people getting Social Security for the old colored people and the old people. And he came by one day and he said, Helen, I need a postal worker for 2 hours a day, $1.06 an hour. So I said, okay, I'll be there tomorrow. So I went to work for 2 hours a day. And one of the regulations was that here I would attend every funeral in town. We were the only government agency in Daphne, and that was he felt strongly about. So, okay, I knew a lot of people that wasn't too much bad, whatever. He would, so-and-so died, and I'll go to the funeral, and so died tomorrow, and you can go to that one. So we done that. But he done a lot for the people in the Eastern Shore getting pensions for the Social Security. And Martin Johnson was head of the Social Security in this part of the country, and he would come in. We had no furniture in the post office. It was just, you can't believe it was a government operation the way it was furnished. So one story that I thought was so amusing, there was an old colored man that was beyond Trine's store porch, and the post office then was where Guido's main restaurant is now. That was also right in the cooking part of that restaurant is where I was born and raised. So one day Mr. Stimpson said to the old colored man, when the cortege comes by, you come in here and tell me so I can jump in my car and go the back street and get down to the Methodist cemetery before the funeral arrives, the body arrives. So, okay. Well, time went on, and the old black never came in to tell Mr. Stimpson. In a few minutes, the mayor, who was then Arthur Mancy, came in and said, well, Mr. Stimpson, I'm surprised that your Helen wasn't at Miss Dora's funeral at the cemetery services. And he jumped up. He said, is it over? He said, yeah. And Mr. Stimpson went out there and asked that colored man, why didn't you call me when the cortege went by? He said, Mr. Stimpson, I never did see Mr. Cordy go by. He was waiting for Mr. Cordy to go by. So.
Helen, can I back you up and ask you a question? Mm-hmm. You told us earlier about the USO, that women in the service weren't allowed. Can you tell us more about that?
They weren't allowed in the USO. And no matter if you went to the door, and they told us that when we got to California, said, we don't know you girls coming from what sections of the country, but says, you're not allowed in the USO, so there's no need to try to get in the front door. So I thought that was just silly.
Were they just trying to protect you?
No, I don't think so. They threw us out with 10,000.
Were you allowed to date the Marines?
Oh, yeah. Oh, I'm telling you, when we were in Hawaii, the boys were coming back from Guadalcanal and that from the Pacific, and oh, they were so beat up. But they had not seen a white woman in 2 or 3 years. Man, we all looked like queens to them, these young boys. And you never saw so many diamond rings floating around in your life. I think I was one of the few that didn't take a ring from a boy, because they were giving those diamond rings out like they were $10 pieces. But then they would go home and meet a childhood friend or somebody they left, and then the girl would get a Dear John letter from them that, and you know, what kind of love affair was they making in just 3 or 4 weeks?
You must have helped a lot of friends through some heartbreak.
Yeah, there was a lot of it, and a lot of them kind of took it on. And nobody asked for a ring back, you know. So the boys came back with money. They weren't poor. But I had an experience that my mother called me and told me that a young boy from Daphne had arrived in Honolulu. They knew that had been seriously injured on Guadalcanal, on Iwo Jima. And would I try to find him and let his mother know, because he lied about his age and went into service at 16 and was sent straight to the Pacific. Didn't even get to come home on furlough, you know how they did on the first 6 weeks. So I went to the captain and told her, I said, I need the day off. She said, what's going on? I said, well, and I told her the story. And she said, well, I tell you what, I'll take you tomorrow myself until we find him. Because I didn't know exactly, I was having to go look for him. So we went to a couple of the bases, and he wasn't registered. And the third base we went, when I went in the door, the officer said she wanted to see the officer there. And, okay, come on in. And it was a doctor from Mobile that had operated on me in 1939 for appendicitis. And he had hunted with my father and grandfather, so they was big friends. Oh, he was so glad to see me. And he took the phone then and called my mother and daddy right then, and he said, guess who I got in my office? And my daddy, of course, just about had a fit. He was so proud. So he took me, he said, we'll go find him. And he took me to this base where he thought he probably was. And oh gosh, there was a barracks, the hospital, there was a barracks with just bed after bed as far as you could look down there and see. And I looked down, and there was a boy on crutches kind of running toward me. Well, when the boy got to me, it was this boy I was looking for. And he said, oh, he didn't know I'd even gone to the Marine Corps, but he said he knew I had passed by his bed and didn't see him. And he said, I knew when you passed by this bed, my bed, that it was you. He was dating my sister, my younger sister and all. I have never seen a guy so glad to see somebody from home. He had been so homesick, and he was beat up so bad. He was just injured, something horrible. And he just passed away about last summer. But he always told the story. Man, if you want to see a queen, said, you lay up there in that bed and watch Helen come down that hall and knowing she's coming to see me. But it was a real experience.
You told us a story, a little happier story about, I think you were on your way back home and you were in San Francisco with some friends.
Yes.
And meeting your friend's brother. Can you tell us more about that?
She had a twin brother. They were from Illinois, Elgin, Illinois. And he had been in the Navy since the war started, right at the time the war started. And she followed him into the Marine Corps. And she had not seen him. in 3 or 4 years. And this is her twin brother. And we get back to California by the same time he did. And when he calls home to report, "I'm home, Mama," the mother tells him, "Well, you go look for your sister. She's supposed to be out there." So we at the Trione Hotel, and we are looking for him to come in. Now, they didn't tell us that we weren't allowed to pick. We weren't picking up a sailor. That was her brother. But he came in there with 2 or 3 guys. And they didn't let us stay. "You cannot pick up a service person. We don't want you." So, okay, we picked up our goods and we left. We went down to the Sir Francis Drake and spent the rest of the evening. And we told them at the Sir Francis Drake, we've already been kicked out of one hotel because we picked up this Navy guy that's a twin brother. And man, they gave us drinks that night, and they just fed us, and we just had the best time. But another time I was in California that I thought was funny, wasn't funny, but odd. At Laguna Beach one night, I was at the bar with 3 or 4 girls and boys, and the bartender says to me, I had red hair at the time, he said, "Red, where are you from?" I said, "Why should I even tell you? You wouldn't know where I was. I could tell you anywhere." I said, "I'm from the eastern shore of Mobile Bay, in a little town called Daphne." He said, "What?" I said, "From the eastern shore of Mobile Bay, from Daphne." He said, "I used to ride in the Ringling Brothers Circus with a woman from went to Daphne, Alabama." I said, "Oh," I said, "Were you in the circus with Miss Clara Schweitzer?" He said, "Do you know Miss Clara?" I said, "Yes." Miss Clara was quite a lady in Daphne, and she had worked hard for the service personnel, and during the Depression she had ran a cannon factory for the relief, feeding the hungry. So Miss Clara would have this, they had a big cannon machine in the building, which is now on the corner of Magnolia Avenue and right across from that colored church in Daphne. And you could bring your supplies, your food, produce there, and she would can it for you. So Mother sent me every day to help Miss Clara do the canning. I must have been just 10 years old, 11 years old. So I had known Miss Clara all my day. She had the first beer parlor in Daphne, which is where the Shrine of the Holy Cross Church is now. There was a little house there. She had fixed the back porch, screened it in so she could sell beer back there. And so I said, there wasn't no telephones in Daphne at the time, not many. So the man said, "How can I get in touch with her?" I said, "Well, I'll tell you what. We'll call my mother and Daddy, and Daddy will go get her and bring her to the phone, and you can talk to her." So he said, "Okay." So we called Daddy, and Daddy went and got Miss Clara, brought her up to the store, called us back. And oh, that man was so excited. Miss Clara was you'd have to know her to appreciate. She was just something. So, he was so glad to talk to her. He had not seen her in 15 years, I don't guess, maybe longer. And after that, no matter, it got to where it would be almost embarrassing. If I went down to Laguna Beach, it didn't matter whether I walked in with 2 people or 10. The night was on him. We never ate so many steaks and had free drinks in our life, but he was so excited about meeting Miss Clara and how he met her again.
Helen, recently you got to go on one of the honor flights to Washington. Tell us about that.
That was great. I started not to go because I have time walking, and I told Dr. Booth, I want to go so bad, but I'm not physically able to do a lot of walking on my own, and I don't want to take a wheelchair and all that. He said, oh, that's no excuse, Helen. He said, come on and go, and you're not going to have to walk. Well, we left Mobile at 5 o'clock in the morning. It was still dark going to the airport, and we boarded a plane, and you just cannot believe how much Barry Booth has put into that trip unless you were there. It was just unreal. And we got to go to the different memorials. The Iwo Jima Memorial was unreal. And the memorial, there was one area that they had all the different servicemen, and they were in bronze, and it was unreal. If you've never been, it's worth the trip to go see. And they had breakfast for us on the plane. They had lunch. We came back to Mobile with lunch with supper on the plane, and the whole day was taken up. But everybody was assigned, for every 2 people, there was one young person to take care of us. And I mean to tell you, that young man, I think, was Barry Booth's nephew. I have never been treated so well in my life. He got, I did not have to walk a foot. I got to see everything. It was just unreal, the amount that went in. The only thing I hated is that, and I was at Arlington, we were at Arlington and saw the change of the guard at 4 o'clock in the evening, and I had seen that, but it was so impressive. All the servicemen, and we were 85 years old, and some of them were wheelchaired in a lot worse shape than I was in. But it was up on top of the hill at Arlington. There's a huge memorial now built that the women built after World War II. And I sent money to that every month until they got it. And that's what I really wanted to see, was that. But that wasn't on the schedule. But my son told me,